Thanks very much, Brian. Shane, you're happy to go next? Shane Foran, I'm sure you all know him. He's works in IT. He served as community representative on both the Transport and Planning Strategic Policy Committee of Galway City Council, research officer for the Galway City Cycling Campaign, and he's contributed to various submissions on the issue of road safety and transport policy, and also independent reviews of national road design policies and Irish cycling facilities design. Thanks, Shane.
Hi everybody, how's it going? Just to check my audience, can I ask how many people here are actually engineers? And how many people are actually roads engineers? Okay. When I wrote this, I kind of focused on the roads engineering side partially, but I might amend it as I'm going along. I think we'll be given 10 minutes. Is that to capture sustainable transport in no pressure. So normally when we're discussing these things, we'd go into things like education, enforcement, and engineering, and I'm going to drop education and enforcement other than to comment that there are issues, particularly at the moment, around how our police service is operating and how our police service is functioning in terms of providing a safe roads infrastructure. And those are kind of things that are definitely key to getting sustainable travel working. On the engineering side, I don't propose to go into the nitty-gritty of curb radii or road surface compositions or that kind of thing, but look at some of the processes and policy issues that we're having at the moment. And a lot of these issues are national issues, they're not just local issues. So I'll go through the potential, follow that with examples of good practice, then the challenges that we face in implementing good practice, and then some of the solutions in my view. How many people are from Galway here? How many people cycle to school? That's about right. I think at the end of the 1970s, if you went to the Jez secondary school, a third of the students cycled to school. In the Bish, 24% of them cycled to school. St. Enda's, 22%. It's now illegal to cycle to the Bish from this side of town. We'll leave that aside. Galway historically was a cycling city. In 2006, it was the last city in Ireland where more schoolgirls cycled to school than drove themselves in cars in terms of secondary school girls. So Galway has a cycling culture. It's been a cycling city for a long time. At the end of the 1970s, a guy called Michael Brennan, I don't know if Park know him, he was a lecturer in the university. He estimated that in afternoon traffic, for every 100 kilometres driven by car in Galway City, there was 19 kilometres travelled by bicycle in the city. And there's some areas of the city that still have pockets of high cycling use. So Salt Hill in the 2006 census data was 9% of people cycled to work or education. Taylor's Hill, it was 8% cycled to work or education. Claddagh was 7%. So in Galway, even now, we have examples of high cycle use, islands of high cycle use in an otherwise sometimes unencouraging environment. And then if we look at the potential across the city, the 2006 data again shows that 44% of workers lived within 5 kilometres of where they go to work in the city, which is roughly 25 minutes on the bicycle. The numbers are even higher for school children and people in college in terms of the proportion who live within a reasonable cycling distance of school. So, given that everybody's stuck in traffic in the morning, why aren't more people just getting back on their bicycles? Because obviously it's a solution that's viable for Galway, and there's potential for cycling in Galway. And the central problem is we're stuck in traffic because we have endured the systematic promotion of car travel over all other considerations for the last 20 years. And we've had the city being constructed around promoting car travel at the expense of walking and cycling. I will also, as an observation, wonder to myself sometimes whether there's a very high proportion of the officials in City Hall who live outside the city. Certain people in key positions who live outside the city and who have been managing the city for the benefit of external commuters rather than people who live in the city. That's just a theory. I don't have evidence for that, but I'm throwing it out there. So we have a history in this country, not just in transport, but in other areas, of having very good policies or practices, adopting good policies and then not really implementing them. And four I've called out tonight is a thing called the 1998 Roads Needs Study. Don't know, has anyone heard of that here? Or could you remember that? There was the National Cycle Policy Framework in 2009. There's a thing called the Design Manual for Urban Roads and Streets. Long story short, we've had some very good policies. The 1998 Roads Needs Study was effectively Dutch practice. And what the Dutch did, starting in the 1990s, where they came up with a policy of excluding through traffic from towns and cities. Okay, so building ring roads and bypasses and reconstructing the roads network so that traffic that wanted to travel at high speeds did not mix with local traffic, with kids going to school or people going to the shops or people going to the local, whatever, local workplace. And they've systematically done that for the last 20 years. And to give the context of that, I don't believe you can construct a functioning cycle facilities network on roads where engineers are also trying to optimize them for high throughput for cars. You can't have both. You can't have functioning pedestrian facilities and people also trying to maximize the number of cars through any particular junction at a particular moment in time. Now, that was our national policy in 1998. And if we had followed that policy, we would now be on the road to copying the Dutch and being like the Dutch. And instead what happened was we implemented a motorway policy where essentially, instead of building, the demurs, besides the idea of deconstructing the traffic, the idea was also to bypass, put ring round roads around all the local towns and all the local towns. So the Loughrays, the Ballinslows, the Cliftons, the Gorts would have ring roads, and we would upgrade the existing en routes, maybe to 1+2 or that kind of level. But there was no new motorways. The specific intent of that policy at the time was not to build new motorways, but instead try to adapt the existing roads infrastructure to a better model. What happened instead was that we followed a motorway policy, and in my opinion that's been a disaster for the country, because yes, we've now produced high-speed routes on certain corridors, but the traffic trying to get to motorways is still trying to get through our town centres and our village centres at the expense of the people who live there. And then that comment is likely to invite the observation that, well, the new bypass for Galway will allow us to fix that. Okay, and the new bypass for Galway will be like a Dutch model. And I have to say that I disagree. I think the new bypass proposed for Galway will be a disaster for Galway. And the reason for that is that Galway does not have a problem with through traffic. The documents associated with the new bypass indicate that only 3% of the traffic that's going to be using it is actually trying to get around the city. The rest of it is traffic that's destined for Galway City. And in my view, building the bypass is simply going to accentuate existing models of car dependency in Galway City. I'm running out of time here, so we might go into that afterwards, but I don't see it as a model. I think if we want to start copying the Dutch in Galway, we just have to start doing it. We stop catering for cars, we stop providing for cars at all the junctions, we stop encouraging people to use cars, because that's what we've been doing for the last 20 years. In discussing transport policy then, we have other policies around reconstructing our cities to make them more cycling friendly and more pedestrian friendly. And the question arises then as to why this has not happened. We've had policies on cycling in place for the last 10 years, and the general improvement in cycling friendliness has not really happened. One issue I want to call out here is there's an enormous conflict of interest with all our local authorities, but particularly cities like Galway, Cork, Limerick and Dublin, which is that, as an example, Galway is the largest car parking operator in Galway City. Okay? Galway City derives significant income from charging people to store private property on public land. Okay? And they are arguably and it's cash money. It's not tied to anything. It's not tied to any project. You know, in Ireland we have a very centralised finance system where money that comes in must be spent on particular things. The parking money is cash money. In my opinion, that creates an enormous conflict of interest when Galway City Council is getting involved in any discussions of transport policy. And I think all of us as citizens need to bear in mind that when Galway City Council talks about transport, they are doing so as people who have a conflict of interest in what's going on. There's a particular conflict of interest when it comes to cycling facilities and walking facilities, because if we take the example of Market Street behind us, where St. Patrick's School is located, there's plenty of room on that street for cycle lanes. The reason there's no cycle lanes there is because Galway City Council is using that road space to make money out of private cars. And you can repeat that model across the city. You know, you don't have to use road space to store private cars. You don't have to use public road space to make money out of private cars. And as long as that's going on, can we really expect Galway City Council to provide cycling facilities in the city centre? That was one elephant in the room. If you're not roads engineers, then the next thing I was going to go into was the whole concept of how we buy roads engineering services or purchase roads engineering services in Ireland, but I think I'm running out of time. But we have an essential problem in Ireland, which is that the Department of Transport does not recognise any supervisory role over how local authorities conduct themselves in the design of public roads. Okay, so they release design guidance and design manuals, but the situation of how that those designs get applied is left to the local authorities. And the situation, to use an analogy rather than getting into examples that'll melt people's brains, but we have an issue with the fire safety regulations in this country where builders are effectively self-certifying that they have complied with the fire regulations. We have a similar situation with our road design policies and how our road design manuals are applied. So even when we have good road design practices in documents or documented as national standards, it's not happening on the ground. And we cannot talk about improving the situation in our towns and cities unless we come up with some means of addressing that. And again, you know, there's questions about, as engineers, I was hoping to be more roads engineers here tonight, you know, how roads engineering design practice is purchased and provisioned and procured in this country. It's dominated by 31 local authorities and by TII. And is there really a functioning market in expertise on sustainable road design in Ireland? Or do these guys have to play to a particular audience? Do our roads engineers have to play to a particular audience, and is that a good thing? So that's as much as I was going to talk about. The solutions I would see for Ireland are things, and for Galway, but these are national issues, but it's the same. Galway has the same problem as other places, is removal of parking income from local authorities. Local authorities should not be allowed to profit from pushing people into private motor cars, and that's what's happening in Ireland at the moment. I think we need the reinstatement of the 1998 roads needs study. We need to abandon the motorway proposals. We need to abandon the proposed bypass proposal. I think that's just an extension of the motorway projects. We need a national road design clearinghouse, like a board planala for road design, but something that looks at all road designs in the country, so that nobody can do anything involving reconstructing roads without clearing it with somebody else first. I know there is a road safety audit process in this country, but I think it's not fit for purpose in my view. And that's pretty much it. Oh, and I would make it, if I was president, Catherine might be there before me, I'd make it a requirement of employment in Galway City Council that all staff employed by Galway City Council must live in the city, because I think that would solve a lot of our problems. Thank you very much.